Hello everyone. I think it's time to tackle a big demo of this gigantic, beautiful beast, the Alphabase by Jomox. It's my first ever big boy drum machine. Before that, I was doing the drums in the modular, but at some point I wanted to focus the modular on the synth sounds and take away the drum sounds into their own dedicated box so that I had more control over the individual sounds, and I wanted to track them individually in the computer. So that's what I did when I finally had the space to have my own home studio. I removed and sold all the drums module, which were pretty good. It wasn't their fault, but I switched to a drum machine for these reasons. And also, I think the workflow is better. Synth on one side, drums on the other side. First of all, let me tell you what I'm not going to mention in this demo. I'm not going to mention the MIDI sequencing because I've never done that. I've never used MIDI in my life apart from clocking, and I'm not sure I'm going to use MIDI so soon. So yeah, if you're looking for how to sequence the Alphabase from your Octatrack or Pyramid or Circlone, don't waste 45 minutes of your life. I'm not going to mention it. Also, I'm not sure I'm going to mention the sample import thing because I've never done it either, and I think it's honestly fun to just use the onboard samples. They are really good. Some are pretty shit, but in any case, it's nice to mangle the samples that are inside. And sometimes if you were looking for a sound, you would try to reach the perfect sample, but since sometimes you can't find the perfect sample, you go a bit deeper into the sound design, and I think it's interesting. So these are the two things I'm not going to mention, but I will try to cover most of the rest, which will be a lot. It's a deep machine, very powerful machine, so strap your belts and plug your subwoofer, and we'll try to see if this Alphabase is the king of the drum machines. And we'll also try to answer the lifelong question: is it better than the Electron analog rhythm or not? Is it just different? Is it just a good drum machine? We'll see in the end of this video. Okay, wow, this is overwhelming. Where do I even start with this thing? Well, I can start with a few facts. I got this machine about a year ago in January 2021. I guess it's a bit more than a year ago now. And I've been using extensively almost every day, and it's been featured on every of my track that came out since. I haven't regretted the choice. Since I've switched to the Alphabase, I've been much more happy with my results. The time where I got the Alphabase also was a time where a lot of things changed in my studio. I finally got a proper space, I had new monitors, I switched to multi-track recording where previously I was only doing stereo tracks recording. I switched from a modular groovebox approach to a drum machine and modular approach, which isn't the same tactile experience and it's not the same workflow basically. It may sound trivial, but to me, workflow is really important. So it was a lot of changes at first, and when you change a lot of things at the same time, you can't really compare one to one. I was happy with the drum modules, but I always felt like my kick were lacking some punch or some lows or whatever. And I was also feeling like my hats were cutting through enough. So maybe this came just from the fact that I wasn't multi-tracking and it was lost in the stereo recording and I couldn't give the punch these sounds deserved. Because I'm sure there are plenty of producers who make amazing music with these modules, maybe even with stereo recording. But when I switched to the Alphabase, I was much more happy about the sounds I could get. But at the same time, I think I retained the options and the flexibility and the sound design possibilities that I had with my modular drums with this. And to me, the Alphabase is right in the sweet spot where you have a lot of knobs and a beautiful tactile interface, which we'll go over in a minute, but also quite a few synthesis options, and the individual voices are quite deep. You have a filter on every voice, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's extremely important to me to tailor drum sounds. The envelopes are great. You have quite a few options, really. If you're coming from modular drums, then you won't be completely lost here. It's definitely not a classic 808 or 909 drum machine where the only parameter you have is pitch and decay. Here you have a ton of parameters, but as you can see, it sort of looks like an old school drum machine, and I love the looks. I think it looks absolutely beautiful. So with all that said, let's dive into the individual voices and see the raw sound of this beast. Okay, let's finally hear this thing. Let's start with the first of the two analog voices, the ever gigantic Jomox kick drum. I am in manual trig mode here, so all I need to do is press that grey button to have a kick drum going. Since I'm gonna tweak all these knobs, the beautiful 4x4 grid here, I'm just gonna start the sequencer. I have a 4/4 pattern going on. I just need to go into edit mode, and here I can tweak these parameters. Every knob is a parameter. So let's start with the tuning. The tuning is the pitch envelope, or the envelope applied to pitch. It's just named tuning here. It's how much of the envelope goes to the pitch, but the actual pitch of your kick drum is this control. So how high or how low your kick drum sound will be. Let's stay there for now. You can be very low with a lot of envelope. You can have pure zaps. Or something more reasonable in between. Then the decay, which goes from pretty short to extremely long and boomy. Then the harmonic section, which I believe is not a wave folder but a wave shaper. It transformed the wave from probably a sine or something to something more harmonically rich, like a saw wave or square. Could also be likened to the effect of a distortion. It's really obvious with long decays. So there's a lot of different sounds to be had with just these controls. Then you have the attack section, which is the top click you hear on top of the kick drum. If I remove everything, that's just a basic kick drum. And as you know, in techno production especially, but maybe in plenty of others, electronic music spheres, people layer the kick drums. They will layer a white 808 kick for the boom, then we had like a tiny scrap of noise on top, or a clap or hat or anything to have the kick cut through a lot more. And this machine has this inside, which I think is amazing. So the attack is actually not really a control, it's just the mix of the pulse and the noise. So if you put the attack to the max, but with zero noise and zero pulse, there's nothing going on. The pulse is the click. It's really the gate that's triggering your kick drum that's mixed in with the sound. And then you have the noise, which bears its name well, it's noise. So you can mix the two and then mix how much of the two you can hear in your kick drum. Then there's another control that's really important for these parameters. It's the gate control. It's really going to have a big impact on the noise and the pulse. You can really hear the difference. So once again, these parameters allow such a variety of kick drums and its top layer. Then you have the EQ. If you have a lot of high-end energy in your kick, you can EQ it, which is a bit like low-pass filtering your kick drum. It's really useful. And once again, great to have this on board rather than doing it in your computer. And once again, all these controls are super interactive. Then you have the compression. The compression is an onboard compressor. I must admit, I don't really use it because contrary to what I was saying with the EQ, where I think it's important and useful to have this on board, I prefer to use the compressors I have that are outboard compressors. So I don't really use that, but it has a big impact on the sound. If you put a compressor at maximum, it's really changing the sound. You can do different things, put the decay at max and changing the decay with only the compressor. It will make a completely different kick drum. But usually I prefer to leave the compressor at 0, get the maximum amplitude possible, and then I can shape that into the DAW and my outboard. Then you have the noise. The noise is shapeable. If I remove the EQ so we really hear the noise, you have a ton of noises different. So you have a myriad of options how to shape those. It's like having 127 top samples to layer on top of your kick drum, which is really unique. Then we have an envelope amount. The envelope amount refers to, I think, the second envelope, which is on page B here. So the second envelope is a second digital, this time, envelope, which you can apply to the pitch. And again, allows you to get completely different kick drums. So you have two pitch envelopes. You have sliding kicks. So the envelope amount is how much of that you're applying to the pitch. And the second envelope is really key to getting certain sounds. So it's really worth diving into. And then lastly, what we have is the LFO. So the LFO, I'll have a longer decay, so it's really obvious. And no EQ. Let's go back on page 1. Oh, when you're on page 1, the LEDs are green. Page 2, LEDs are red. So the LFO, you have the wave, the rate, and the intensity, which is the depth. So you can clearly hear the effect here. The intensity is at 32, you can go overboard and do some hybrid kick bassline. And if you think numbers is not a very clear way to display the wave of a LFO, you'd be entirely right. There is a manual where it says which number is which wave, but of course nobody reads that. Or at least you read it once and then you're done. So the only good point about this is that you learn to use your ears. And you can get quite surprising and ever-changing results, which may not be the best case for kick drum. For other instruments, it's really nice because the LFO is available for all of these. Same with the rate. The numbers here go from 1 to 127, the normal MIDI numbers, but they do correspond to sensing times, which of course I don't know by heart. Once again, you try to do that by ear, which is not as bad as it seems. This is without LFO, but LFO can give a lot of movement to your kick drums. So it's a super powerful tool. On page B here, the volume turns into accent. So these are all accented, but you can add non-accented kicks. So this is with 0 accent and most kicks are the same level. And I can hear people from here saying, oh, but my electron machine has 127 levels of velocity. And of course you'd be right. The Alphabase only has one level of accent, but you really can get a lot of expressivity of just this one accent level. So, yeah, take that, Electron. Let's move on to the absolute mindfuck that is the Mbrane. The Mbrane is the second analog instrument of the Alphabase. It's supposed to be a snare, a tom, a clave. You can do a ton of things with it. And it's true. It's far-reaching in terms of sound. You can really do a lot. This thing is two intertwined resonating filters that are probably feedbacking, and I don't really know. The name of the controls are a bit esoteric, like you have the pitch, which is okay, but then damp, then cup. I mean, what does it mean? Who knows? But it's a bit of a lucky stroll down these controls, but you can definitely find some good stuff. And let's start the sequence and try to find some good stuff while tweaking the controls widely. So this is with, just these controls. The thing is, covers vastly different territories. So you have to know more or less what you want to do with it first. Once again, there's a beautiful noise to layer, decay, and cup. What does cup mean? You have a filter for the noise, different kind of noises, and a shaper for the noise too. For this instrument, you have two LFOs, one on each page. On the second page, you have also the decay and attack, the envelope for each filter. So, yeah, I changed this beyond recognition, but I guess you get my point. It's really complicated, but it's worth looking into it, and there are lots and lots of great stuff that can be made with it. If you scroll down the preset list, most of what is offered is variation on snares or claps or weird FM noises. So if you like one, you can always go and see what the controls are and start from there. This is a convincing snare. But all of this was before the new update, which adds the scene feature. And the scene feature is basically a feature that gives you 9 presets. So scene 1 is a snare. Scene 2 is another snare. Same as scene 3. Same as scene 4. Then you have toms on 5 and 6. And 7. And 8 gives you beautiful kick. 9 gives you another beautiful kick. So the good thing with these scenes is that not only these are presets, they're actually starting points where all the controls have a reduced range. This to me makes the Mbrane much, much more usable. And the day I installed the update, I made a track using the Mbrane as a tom, starting I think from preset 6, that I just tweaked it to where I liked it. But you can move the pitch, but it's much finer. All the controls are still there, and you can still kind of change it completely, but not as drastically as the classic controls, which are really, really wide-ranging. And you can also always just go back to the basic sound with this. So yeah, I think it's really, really useful. Thank you, Jorgen, for putting that in. It's a very welcome update. And even if what I've done here is pretty shit, I mean, no wonder I never found anything with the Mbrane before if I turn the controls like that. I think the Mbrane really becomes a lot more interesting with effect, be it the internal effects or external effects, as well as when you pitch sequence your stuff. So let's talk about that now while we're on the Mbrane, and we can always revisit it later. If you want to apply pitch to your sequence, it's like P-Logs, but just for pitch. So here you can see the steps, and you just have to move the sliders where you want some pitch change. So this is really easy to do, and you can always go back and edit your sequence. You just need to go to kit sec, and then you can just change. And go back to sec here. Yeah, this is once again not very interesting, but I think you'll get my point where I say that the Mbrane really benefits from this pitch thingy, and then throw delay, throw some reverb, throw some distortion, whatever effect you like to use, and then the Mbrane becomes super usable and can be really the basis of a track with the kick drum. So enough of that cheaty sequence. Let's move on to the hats. the closed hi-hat and open hi-hat. I'm going to treat them together because they are part of the same structure. As you can maybe see, the kick drum and Mbrane are two different distinct voices, analog voices. Then we have the hi-hat group, which is a sample plus hi-hat filter, which is a specific filter. It's different than the filter that's available on the other instruments, plus VCA. The closed hat and open hat is the closed one, is the open one. So if we take the basics, you can choose a sample. You can choose any sample from, these are the onboard samples. So all the first ones are hats or stuff that can be used as hats. You have starting point, stop point. So you can go anywhere you'd like, plenty of samples. There are 250 something samples. The ones that are interesting to us right now are the first ones. Most of the hat samples are between 1 and 20 something. Let's say we're happy with this one. Then you have the pitch. The normal pitch is 55. You can go as high as you'd like. And very low. It has a very crunchy quality, if you like this. I usually don't move the pitch knobs much. I might tweak it to tailor it to the track I'm making, but usually stay around 55. Then you have the envelope, and the envelope is really, really nice. It's true for all these instruments, but so this is the attack, of course. It increases the attack time. Then the decay, so you can have a very short sustain and release and just use the decay as the attack decay envelope. But you have the sustain and release, so why not use them? So you can get a lot of expressivity here. Then you have the low pass and high pass. So this is self-explanatory, low pass and high cut. I usually leave the low pass open, but cut the lows. It saves me time. I don't have to do it on the computer. It's an analog filter, so it's really good sounding. I mean, it's not because it's analog, but it is good sounding. And you can deactivate the filter. Here you have the pure sample. On page B, you have the envelope amount, which applies to the filter. And once again, this is very interactive with the resonance amount. And you get the classic envelope to filter effect. So depending if you like it or not, you can have it. And then, as is the case with most sample instruments, you can layer the sample with some noise. And you have the choice from all these different kind of metallic noises. And you can also, if you go to sample here 0, you just have the noise. So depending on the sample, you can't really hear the sample behind the noise. That's something that's a bit annoying, is that you can't control the volume of the noise. So you have to tailor it with the filters or find a sample that can be heard in between the noise, like this one. Or you can just create your hats with just the noise. So the pitch doesn't work, of course, here. So it's a totally valid way of creating your own custom hats. And like I said, there are plenty of cool noises. Some are a bit strange, but lots of glitchy digital noises, metallic noises, pure white noise, pink noise, whatever you have. And off. Last but not least, you have the LFO, which you can once again apply to different parameters here. It's not only the pitch like for the kick drum. Here you have the rate, wave, and tune. So this is applied to the tuning. If you go to page B, you can apply it to the filters and to the VCA. So depending on your LFO settings, you can really make some AM modulation or just volume automation. Contrary to the LFO again in the kick drum, there is a slow version that goes up to 127 and then it goes to fast. And again, you have the same range. So it's easier to get nice results here. And the LFO to the filter and LFO to VCA are really useful. And you can also sync the LFO, which will sync the LFO to every trigger. And again, accent volume here. Now let's move on to these four voices, which have sort of the same structure as the closed hat and open hat. So it's a sample followed by an analog multimode filter, then followed by an analog VCA. These are named clap, rimshot, crash, and ride, but you could have 4 toms or 3 different rides or 4 snares, whatever. It's only determined by the sample you choose at the beginning. I tend to use the clap as a clap because I like claps. The rimshot, what is there? It's a tom here, but you could have different samples, whatever you like. The crash is, well, maybe more of a ride here. And the ride is a different kind of ride. In the past, I used the crash as a tom most of the time. There are 11 instruments. It's a lot. I don't always use the 11 instruments at once. I don't really know how the workflow translates on screen, but you very quickly learn which knob is which parameter because they're all the same across all the instruments pretty much. Like the cutoff is always here, the envelopes is always this row. I really never refer to what's written on the box. You just know it basically. Here's an obvious example of the filter on the ride. Because you can get very nice movements with the envelope and the LFO. And also the noise. You can create really nice soundscapes. Stuff like this sound amazing through a reverb and delay, and it's really worth exploring the noises and the filters and the envelope. Like, try to do this on any other machine. And that's where having basically no clear information on which wave equals what on the LFO can get interesting. I'm sure you had a hard time believing me before, but I hope you do now. Because who knows what 12 is? I could know if I took out the manual and spent an hour looking for this information, but do I want to do that? I think you know. It's more interesting to just wiggle around. Of course, you can tweak the sound to oblivion. where it doesn't sound anything remotely good. But you don't have to put all the modulation at the maximum. The good thing is, with this LFO thingy, where we never know what time it is, how the rate relates to the timing, is that it's not going to loop perfectly. So if you record like 5 minutes of this, the entire length of your track, it's going to be always moving. And if you're playing live with it, it's not going to sound like a loop sample. It's going to sound like something alive, which honestly I think is great, and not many machines have that. Last but not least, let's quickly cover the X Sample 1 and X Sample 2. These are super basic voices that are completely digital with limited controls. So let's quickly start the sequencer. The only thing you can do with these two, so you select the sample, you can change the pitch, change the start point, stop point, and the sample, of course, but all the other controls are disabled. So yeah, these are very limited, but they're nice, and I often use them to have, several different kinds of hat, and they all go through the left-right master output, as well as the FM synth. So let's mute these two and have a look at the second mindfuck of this machine, which is the FM synth. So the FM synth doesn't have the scene feature that the Mbrane got with the new update. I think it's a bit easier though than the Mbrane, and I definitely got plenty of very usable sounds out of them, especially weird FM percussions, tom-like sounds, or you can get chords if you're passionate enough, or if you go through the presets and try to tweak them. I do use it quite often, and it really does sound nice when it's run through effects. So, of course, this sounds shitty, but the way it's laid out is it's a grid. So let's put everything to 0. This is the frequency of the first one. And then this is the frequency of the second one. This is the frequency of the third one and the fourth one. Every other knob determines how much of the oscillator you're applying to the other oscillator. So if you have here basically a sine wave from oscillator 1, and you choose the pitch of the second one, so you hear both, but then you can choose to apply the FM, the second oscillator, with the first one, and then you get FM tones. And then you can cross modulate with FMing the first one with the second one, or inversely, I'm not sure. So if you want to start to understand how it works, it's better to just start with 1 or 2 and then go from there. Because if you go wild like this, like I was previously doing on the Mbrane, there's a good chance you're going to end up with white noise pretty quickly. All nice Kraftwerk robot noises. And there's a page B with the attack, release, and amount parameters. So here you can get something much more tight, much tighter, which allows you to go a bit more crazy without scaring everyone away. So once again, aimless noodling has very slim chances of bringing you anywhere, but if you spend a little time with it and get to know it, I think it can be a real powerhouse. I think Jürgen added this like as a second thought and was really a late addition to the machine, but it's really powerful. And I don't play keys for shit, but I've read on the internet that if you plug like a key step or whatever and play this instrument, it's quite powerful. So something to try. And once again, you can just scroll through kits and then you have better things than what I just did, like a chord. The FM synth especially sounds great through effects, the internal effects. Let's just go to the internal effects. So you have to hit shift, then FX, then enter, which admittedly is a bit convoluted. And I wish there was a shortcut to do this, especially live. And then you choose with every knob the amount of reverb you put to. So the first row is the parameters of the reverb, and then every knob is how much to every instrument. So how much reverb. Here is the FM reverb, and here it's all the other instruments. If you hit page B, it's the same thing for the delay. And I think you'll agree with me that these effects sound pretty good. All this to say that the FM synth is a definitely usable and powerful instrument. You just have to take your time with it. It's honestly not that hard. Okay, it's been an awful lot of talking. So what do you say we have a little jam on this thing using the patterns that I pre-program on this? Let's just use this to show the capabilities of the Alphabase, because the individual sound by themselves, okay, it's nice, but yeah, it's hard to really forge an opinion with just individual sounds. Can get boring after a while, which I totally get. I won't be using any external effects. The reverb, delay you might hear are from the Alphabase. I'm not going to use any VST, anything. The sound will be purely dry, but I will turn on the overstayer and the Elysia EQ and compressor after a while for the only reason that it's fun. So brace yourself, let's go. Okay, enough child's play. The question I get asked the most often about the Alphabase is, how easy is it to use? Well, I can answer quite confidently saying it's really easy to use. There's no deeper layer about any of this. The deepest you can go is page B. This instrument is mostly what you see is what you get. It's really knobby. The matrix of knobs gets really second nature after a while. You might think such a tiny screen with just basic numbers on it isn't very up to date or bleeding edge. And you're right, it's not a beautiful OLED screen with beautifully designed waveforms or whatever, but it doesn't really need those. It would distract from the experience. The numbers, they are not really perfect to display some informations like LFO waves, but it forces you to use your ears, and after a while, like any instrument, you learn your way around it, and it's enjoyable to use. It's not a pain in the ass at all. A modular synth is much more complicated to use, and nobody asked me ever how it's supposed to be used. I know Jomox has a history of pretty flawed software, maybe. I haven't tried the previous drum machines by Jomox. I can't say much about those. This one is rock solid. There were a few bugs at the beginning and they were ironed out. It's a beautiful instrument. It begs to be played, and most of all, it sounds great on your monitors, and it will sound amazing on big PA systems. I guess the best way to just show how this thing must be used is to just make a sort of beat or track from scratch. I will proceed how I do when I'm home producing. I will start putting notes, putting stuff on the drum machine, but after that I will add some processing in the computer, because that's usually how I work. And it's not because it's a big drum machine that it should be used dry. It will sound 1,000 times better if you put a slight touch of EQ, reverb, or effects. The internal effects are pretty good, but it's of course no match for dedicated effects. Even if you get a 909, pay 10,000 euros for one, then you will need to process it. It's just not a record in itself. Even though, frankly, the Alphabase sounds better dry than most drum machines I've tried, and you can definitely use it dry. Enough talking, let's start the sequencer. I have just a kick drum playing here. So like I said, we will start hearing everything dry, and once there are more elements in there, I'll bring the processing in the computer and I'll bring the overstayer. So here's my kick. It's pretty short. Like I was saying when I was talking about the kick drum, I moved away from long, boomy kicks. Then we have the hats. So this is the most classic drum pattern ever. All these are accented. You can add something that's not accented if you want. As you can see, there are 32 steps to my hats and kick drum patterns. That's the default. Then the second closed hat takes already much more space because there's the internal reverb playing, which I can cut. If you, as you saw, all these knobs, if you click them, they become mutes, which is quite handy and becomes really second nature again. Knob 14 is a mute for the reverb, not the delay, just the reverb. It can be useful in a live context or also just for production context. You don't have to go into the parameters, just mute it here. So let's bring it back. It fills the air quite nicely, and when you compress a drum at the end, a drum machine at the end, this reverb and everything gets, smashed and compressed and really fills the void in between the hits, and I really like that effect. You can of course tweak the reverb. with more high frequency or less, bigger reverb, but then it self-oscillates, so it's too much. I think it was good like this. Can cut the lows, make it more dull. And you have the level for the reverb as well. But this is a bit too much, so yeah, let's keep it around here. Then we can add some shuffle to these hats. Shift, shuffle, which is number 6. I like 3. 4 can be a bit too much, but can be nice too, but let's go with 3. Okay, so this is a very basic, extremely basic pattern. Now let's move on to something a bit more fat to really feel the low end. So I'm gonna arbitrarily use the rim shot for this, because the clap I want to use as a clap later. And the rim shot, usually I don't use a rim shot. I'm not even sure there's a rim shot sample in there, but you can definitely make one. Something I didn't mention before is that all these filters here are self-resonating. So you can make toms, you can make claves without any sample, just by having the filter resonate. And since there's a VCA afterwards, you can make any kind of percussion you like, especially since there's an envelope dedicated to the filter. So let's make a pattern for the rim shot. Usually I try to, if I know I'm going to make like a tom sound, I try to put my hits in between the kick drums. This one sounds good. I think I've used it before. This one is a tom, kind of more obviously a tom. This is, who knows? This one sounds good too. But let's have this one. This one is very low heavy. So if I turn on the filter, so you can have, really the best way to do it is just to lower the cutoff until you feel like where it should be, and then you can bring the envelope to the filter so that it just pushes through the highs, but just on the hits. I kind of like doing this. Then you can always move the envelope of the filter as you wish. But here, something short like this works perfectly. And then another thing I like to do is move the filter with the LFO. So I'll just add some LFO to the cutoff somewhere like here. And then you can clearly hear the effect. Some waves are positive, some waves are negatives. Once again, that's not very obvious. You need to go and check the manual. I'll maybe put something on the screen later. And so this sounds really, really good when you add effects to it. So I'll go ahead and do that, add some delay, and also just a compressor, Elysia compressor in plugin form, just to catch the peak and make it more like a sausage, really. and then make it mono because the delay is stereo, or at least make the bass mono, and then some EQ to cut the lows, and track spacer, a plugin that's a hybrid compressor EQ to move it away from the kick. I'm bringing in the plugins for this one. And that's where the LFO movement to the cutoff really gives a lot of texture and makes it techno, really. So now we can add our claps, for example. If you've previously added a step with accent, it's gonna remember there was an accent there. So that's why when I hit 10, there was automatically an accent. Again, there's some internal reverb here. There's no outboard effects. I'll bring the outboard effects later, but this is just dry, or just the internal for now. Okay, so the rim shot is our toms. Now we can bring the crash. The crash is a ride, actually. And another thing I haven't mentioned yet is that Jorgen says it's better to use the full volume out of on the individual outputs to get the full strength of the Alphabase. The Alphabase run extremely hot, so it's capable of clipping your mixer or interface even when you're using the individual outputs. But yeah, if your interface can handle such levels, then put it to the maximum and then back off into your DAW. The sound is really different when you're using the full sound or just somewhere in between, and frankly it sounds better this way. So I personally take the maker of this box advice. So that's a ride on the crash channel. It's maybe a bit too high. We can always filter it. That's a low pass. That's a high pass. Let's just forget about all this movement. You can get really cool results. So that's the filter, just static, no resonance. And then you can add some envelope. And you can really find cool rhythms with the LFO, the rate, go crazy with the tuning. I mean, once again, when you know your way around the controls, you can really have fun with this. So, let's move on to ride. Let's unmute it. Oh, there's already something. Yeah, 2. Well, it's sort of another ride actually. It's not the same sample. Probably just a long hi-hat, this one. Okay, now let's tackle the beast. Let's see what we can do with the FM synth. I want to use the FM synth here as a proper like synth line because we already have quite a lot of percussions going on. To do this, I want to reduce the number of steps. So let's say we want 30, instead of 32, which is the standard when you start a new pattern, I want to do 31. When you do this, unfortunately, it doesn't make it right where it should be. So it's best to do this with the sequencer stopped and then start again. Here everything is muted, so it doesn't really matter. It's just demo. But if you're making it live, bear in mind that your patterns will be a bit shifted. I have 31 steps. Let's go for maybe something simple like this. I don't want to have all this, or maybe this. Yeah. So let's bring back. I randomized these knobs before, but it looks like I pre-programmed something because it sounds okay. Well, let's change it nonetheless. So there's obviously some effects here. Let's check them out. So quite a lot of reverb. Obviously, these kind of sounds kind of need some reverb and some delay as well. We'll obviously add some tape delay and whatever to it next, but for now let's just focus on the Alphabase. One thing I've mentioned before in other videos that's annoying as well is that, especially when you mute the hats, if you have something else selectioned, you are at risk of changing the sample. Basically, when you press the encoder, you can by mistake turn it and they will change the parameter. It's especially drastic and annoying if that's the sample number, but live it can be a real pain in the ass. So a good thing to do is either you select an instrument you're not using, or just press the BPM MIDI button and then the knob doesn't respond only to the mutes. That's why sometimes you see me pressing the BPM MIDI button. Okay, so now that we're here, I think we can go into the sequencing and have fun trying to sequence some of our notes here. So now let me bring some other VST stuff. I have some processing on the kick, some EQ and a little distortion. I think you can hear the difference. And I have a delay and a phaser on the FM synth. Gives us it smoothes the FM synth, and since there's also the reverb coming out of here, I think a phaser is really effective. And then at last we can bring the pedals. This is the H9, this is the Al Capistan, and this is a convolution reverb from Ableton. Very last, we can bring the overstayer. So I think you'll agree with me, this is a powerful machine and it's easy to do. You just spend some time with it. Sure, you can make mistakes, but you can make mistakes in every aspect in life. So why not do them while using a great drum machine? Let's take a tour of the dreaded shift functions. So the shift functions, they're not exactly things you need all the time, or most of the time you don't even need them while you're playing. Some of them you do, like the shuffle, the FX, you might want to add them while you're playing, but most of the time it's just set and forget, or it's just like back end stuff like storing patterns or starting from scratch or something like this. So let's go through them sequentially. I'll start the pattern. You can save your kit. You choose your number with the encoder, of course, enter. Every analog instrument is going to stop. If you don't want the analog instrument to stop while you're saving, which might be understandable, you can quick save with encoder 15, but it's not only gonna save to the RAM. So if you want to permanently save, you need then to store the kit with 1 and store the pattern with 3, which again stops everything. Just don't save while you're recording or while you're in the middle of a live set, but it could make a nice break, who knows. Number 2 is clear pattern. I'm not going to do that, but I guess you understand how it works. Number 4 is init kit. So once again, I think it's quite obvious. It goes back to the initial kit. I've demonstrated 5 already with the last step. We can do it again if you want. Last step for the FM synth is 32. Let's go to 33 or even 31. Okay, so if you want it to work best, it's better to stop and start again. And so now our FM synth is going to change position because it's polymetric compared to the rest of the instruments. Then we have the shuffle. Let's add some shuffle to the hats. Once again, if you're in edit mode, it's just for this track. If you're out of the edit mode, it's for the entire track. Never really used it, but it's fun. Bit wonky. Then we have the real-time right. I've never done that, so I'm not gonna mention it, but it's there. Then we have the metronome, on or off. Nice sounding metronome. Then we have the stereo panning. Enter. You can of course pan the instrument as you'd like. So let's pan maybe the clap. There was a bug in the previous version of the OS where you needed to go up all the way to 127 and back to 73 so that the instrument wouldn't bleed to the stereo output, but it's okay now, I think. Okay, then you have the scale. So self-explanatory, you have that on most drum machines. This one is like halftime. Sounds pretty cool and heavy. The other ones are a bit more wacky, but this one I can definitely see myself using. Okay. Then we have the ABCD copy. So let's take the clap as an example. The clap has 32 steps, but there's nothing on page B, so let's copy the page A on page B. So ABCD copy, you choose ABCD copy A to B, select destination, and then press enter. And then B has the same pattern as A. It's fairly easy to do live, of course. Then the roll flam. Roll flam isn't the easiest to do, but I'll showcase that. So shift, roll flam, then you select the kind of roll flam you like. Let's take something really obvious, like this. Enter, and then you need to double click on the step. You can of course still accent it, and if this one annoys you, just double click again. Or bring it back. Let's leave it at that, it's fun. Then we have the FX, which I've already mentioned, but let's go back to it. Shift, FX, enter, and then you can add. So the first row is always the parameters. A is reverb, B is delay. So let's add reverb to a kick drum with no reason. I have a phaser on the master, so that's why it sounds whooshy-washy. And then shutdown, which I'm not gonna do, but again, self-explanatory. So yeah, that's the shift functions. You can also chain patterns using the chain function here. Just go out of the edit trig, hit chain, then you need to pull this one, and if it's gonna chain all these. So these are absolutely not related, so it sounds absolutely crazy. But yeah, you get the idea. Go back to edit mode. And I think we've covered a good chunk of the Alphabase right now. Something I haven't mentioned yet about the Alphabase is the P-locks. So the Alphabase has two ways to P-lock stuff. You can P-lock the pitch, which is always the sequencer. So we've seen that before. You select your instrument, its sequencer, you arrive at this page, and then you can move the pitch up of your steps. So you have 2 octaves available. The first bar is 1 octave, then second bar is 2nd octave. You can only pitch up. And then you can P-lock any other parameters. So to do this, you need to be in the edit mode like this, where you can edit any parameter. And to showcase that, let's change the decay of the kick drum. So here's my pattern. Let's solo the kick drum so we can clearly hear the effect. So the way this works is you need to be in edit mode and sequencer mode, and you hold the step where you want to p-lock the stuff. So far it's very similar to an Electron machine. You move up the desired parameter, let's say this one, we want to go to 90. And the way this works is it's a CC message, a MIDI CC, so it brings it up, but it doesn't bring it down. So you need to bring it down yourself where you want the effect to stop. Let's say the next step. And now you can clearly hear the difference, and you can see it on the screen while you are in edit trig mode. And say you're not really happy with this result, you can go into the kit sequence, go to right, and then you can see your p-locks, and then you move to this one and it's 90. You can go back to something more subtle if you prefer. And that's the way you p-lock. In single multi-mode, you can also p-lock change of instruments. Basically, I've never used a single in multi-mode, and I don't think I'm gonna demonstrate it here because, like I said, I've never used it, so I don't think I'm the best person to showcase it. But the difference between the two is single is like this. You have one kit where every instrument is one sound, and multi-mode is something of a specialty of Jomox, where you can pick and choose every instrument among your kits. So let's say you have kick, which is kit 1, and then the hats are going to be kit 6, and because you like the one on kit 6, so you can pick and choose. And I guess it's probably very effective. I've just not felt the need to explore this yet. But with the p-locks, you can p-lock instruments, so p-lock sounds, a bit like you can in Electron machines. Even on my Octatrack, I never do it, so well. But that's the way you p-lock stuff on the Alphabase. It's powerful, not that complicated to use. And yeah, it's there, so go and use it. So what's my final word on the Alphabase? Is it the best drum machine out there? I think so. At least it was my choice when it came to spending a good chunk of money on something capable of doing drums. I make techno music. Drums are the basis, the foundation of everything I do, so it made sense for me. And like I said, I was taken with the aesthetics of the machine. I think it's right in between a classic machine with the knobs, with the looks, with the somewhat stripped down aspect and feature set, and the more crazy, complicated machines like the Electron analog rhythm or just an Octatrack, which I have too. But the Octatrack to me is more a live box, something to reduce the amount of gear I bring on stage. I see this a bit as the modular, as in you can make beautiful mistakes, happy accidents. But the real question in most people's head is the Alphabase the equivalent of the analog rhythm by Electron? It's true that they are almost the same price. And if you look from afar, the Electron machines can do a lot more. The sequencer, there's no two-way about it, is 5 times as powerful. But like I said, I like the simple sequencer. It works for me. And if you're not all about pushing the Electron sequencer to its absolute limit, maybe this will work for you. If what you love to do is p-locking every single step of your analog rhythm, then just don't think about the Alphabase. What the Alphabase has going for it is definitely the sounds, the strength, the dynamics, the knobby interface. You pretty much always know what's going on. I've used it live and it's definitely doable. Like I said, there's a few mistakes you shouldn't do, otherwise you'll have bad surprises. But other than that, it's a very straightforward and fun machine. You know what the computer nerd says, that the biggest malware is usually between the screen and the chair. And it's a bit the same thing with the Alphabase. Most of the dumb stuff you can make is user error. Little tweaks to the UI would have been better, but this machine doesn't deserve all the talk about the bad UI. It has a very simple and pretty great UI, actually. What you see is what you get. It's rather simple. Just there's like two things that are a bit more complicated to do, and it's the roll, flam, and p-locks. And even then, it's a couple clicks, and once you're used to them, it's easy to do. And I think that the Alphabase is an instrument. You have to learn how to use it. People really blow it way out of proportions. It's really not that complicated. So take that as you will. I'm not forcing you to buy it. Certainly not. You can buy as many analog rhythm as you want. You can also not buy anything and just use 909 samples in Ableton and it's going to sound fine. So to each his own. This was my choice. I hope this video showcased my love for it. There's of course another video when I mostly run patterns through the overstayer. There's the video where I explain my setup for the Resilience live set, where I talk a little about the Alphabase. I will upload a big set of samples from my Patreon subscribers, and we'll probably also put it up for sale on Bandcamp or something. I think the Alphabase is truly underrepresented in the sample departments, but also just on the internet. I don't know why it's so obscure. It's been out for 4 years almost. If you like the video, you can go on Patreon and support the channel with more samples, more videos, more modular videos. You can also take one-on-one lessons with me about the modular synth, but also the Alphabase. With that said, I'll see you next time in another video. Cheers.